Have you ever looked at a perennial garden in midsummer and wondered why one yard is overflowing with towering coneflowers, deep purple salvias, and glowing black-eyed Susans, while another yard, planted with the exact same flowers, looks tired, sparse, and barely hanging on? It's tempting to assume the difference comes down to expensive fertilizers, premium compost, or some secret product hidden away in a garden shed. But what if the biggest difference isn't feeding the plants at all? What if the real secret is feeding the soil first? Because once you understand what I'm about to show you, you'll stop looking at your garden the same way. In today's video, I'm going to show you a simple homemade microbial elixir made from just 4 ordinary ingredients. It doesn't look impressive. In fact, it looks more like something you'd accidentally leave on a kitchen counter than a garden booster. But when it's prepared and used correctly, it can help encourage the beneficial biology beneath your perennial beds, the invisible workforce that helps plants access nutrients, develop stronger roots, and support healthier growth over time. Now, this isn't magic. It isn't an instant bloom potion, and it won't transform a struggling perennial into a prize-winning plant overnight. But it can help create healthier soil, and healthier soil almost always leads to healthier plants. Later in this video, I'll also show you which perennials appreciate this mixture, and just as importantly, which popular garden plants should never receive it, because one ingredient can actually work against them if you're not careful. That one detail alone could save an entire flower bed. Before we dive into today's recipe, I have a major announcement. The Plant Once Garden is finally here. Many of you have been asking about this guide for months, and I truly appreciate your patience while I took the time to make it something special. It's a beautifully designed, approximately 150-page gardening reference that brings together the perennial foundations, planting calendars, complete garden plans, and low-maintenance methods we've talked about across this channel, all organized into one place you can keep coming back to year after year. Inside you'll find 90 reliable perennial plants, 6 complete garden plans, the no-labor planting calendar, the full hydrogen peroxide guide, plants that attract hummingbirds, the mistakes that shorten the life of perennial gardens, and much more. If you'd like a copy, simply scan the QR code on your screen, or use the link in the pinned comment or description below. Now, let's get back to today's topic. So what exactly goes into this homemade microbial elixir? Surprisingly, not much. There are only 4 primary ingredients, and chances are you already have most of them sitting somewhere in your kitchen. What makes this recipe interesting isn't any single ingredient. It's the way they work together. Each one serves a different purpose. One helps activate microbial life. One provides food. One introduces beneficial bacteria. And one gently influences the soil environment around the roots. Together, they create a living mixture that's designed to support the biology already present in your garden soil. Let's begin with the ingredient that does most of the work. If you've ever baked bread, you've already worked with one of nature's most remarkable living organisms: yeast. Most people think of yeast only as something that makes bread rise, but it's actually a living microorganism. When it's given warmth, moisture, and a food source, it begins multiplying rapidly. That's exactly what we want. Unlike fertilizer, yeast isn't supplying your plants with large amounts of nutrients. Instead, it's helping create a biologically active mixture that encourages microbial activity once it's introduced into the soil. Many gardeners describe yeast as a microbial activator rather than a plant food. Its job is to help wake up the biological processes happening beneath the surface. Of course, yeast can't do much if it doesn't have something to eat. That's where molasses comes in. Molasses provides the sugars the yeast needs to begin fermenting. Because it's much less refined than ordinary white sugar, it also contains small amounts of naturally occurring minerals like potassium, calcium, magnesium, and iron. Those minerals are a nice bonus, but the real purpose of the molasses is providing energy for the fermentation. Think of it as breakfast for the yeast. Once dissolved into warm water, the sugars become immediately available, allowing the yeast to become active and multiply. After several hours, And usually by the following morning, you should notice bubbles and a creamy layer of foam developing across the surface. That's exactly what you're hoping to see. It tells you the yeast is alive and the fermentation is working. If the mixture stays completely flat, with no bubbles and no foam, it's usually a sign that the yeast never activated. In that case, it's much better to start over than use a mixture that never became biologically active. The third ingredient introduces another helpful group of microorganisms. Buttermilk. While yeast and bacteria are very different organisms, they can complement one another in this recipe. Buttermilk naturally contains beneficial lactic acid bacteria, including lactobacillus, which many people already recognize from fermented dairy products. Once introduced into the soil, these bacteria become part of the diverse microbial community living around plant roots. Healthy soil contains countless different microorganisms, each performing different jobs. Some help decompose organic matter. Others participate in nutrient cycling. A diverse microbial community is generally healthier than one dominated by only a few organisms. Buttermilk also contributes a small amount of calcium, providing another minor benefit for overall plant health. If you don't happen to have buttermilk available, don't worry. Plain, unsweetened yogurt, thinned with a little water, makes a perfectly acceptable substitute because it contains many of the same beneficial bacteria. The important part is introducing those living cultures into the mixture. Now we come to the ingredient that surprises almost everyone: baking soda. Yes, ordinary baking soda. This is also the ingredient that deserves the greatest amount of respect. Only a small quantity is needed. For a 1-gallon batch, 1 level tablespoon is plenty. More is definitely not better. Used sparingly, baking soda can gently nudge the soil surface toward a slightly more alkaline condition. Many popular perennial plants, including salvias, lavender, rosemary, thyme, and rudbeckias, tolerate or even appreciate soils that lean slightly toward the alkaline side. Some gardeners also believe that mildly alkaline surface conditions may be a little less welcoming for certain fungal problems. Notice the wording, may. This isn't a fungicide. It doesn't sterilize your soil. And it certainly doesn't replace good watering practices, proper spacing, or overall garden hygiene. Its role is simply to become one small part of the finished mixture. Because baking soda influences soil chemistry, careful measuring is essential. Guessing isn't a good idea. Now that we know what each ingredient contributes, it's time to put everything together. Start with 1 gallon of lukewarm, non-chlorinated water. Temperature matters more than many people realize. Cold water slows the yeast considerably. Very hot water can kill it before fermentation even begins. The goal is water that's comfortably warm, about the temperature of a warm bath. Warm enough to encourage activity. Never hot enough to damage the yeast. Pour the molasses into the warm water and stir until it's completely dissolved. Take your time here. The sugars should be evenly distributed throughout the mixture. Next, sprinkle the active dry yeast gently across the surface. Rather than stirring aggressively, allow the yeast to sit for a few minutes so it can naturally absorb moisture and begin activating. Once that's done, loosely cover the container with a towel, paper towel, or a lid that's resting on top, without being fully tightened. This is important. Fermentation naturally produces gas. A tightly sealed container can build pressure surprisingly quickly. Using a loose cover allows that pressure to escape safely while still protecting the mixture from dirt and insects. Now comes the hardest part: waiting. Leave the mixture at room temperature overnight. During that time, the yeast feeds on the sugars, multiplies, and creates the fermentation we're looking for. When you return the next morning, you should see a light layer of bubbles or creamy foam across the surface. That's a simple visual sign that the microbial activity has begun. Once the fermentation is active, gently stir in the buttermilk. Finally, add the measured baking soda and stir everything together until well combined. At that point, your homemade microbial elixir is ready to use. One important thing to remember is that this is a living mixture. It's at its best when it's fresh. Try to use it within a day or two after it's finished fermenting. If it develops a foul, rotten smell instead of a mild fermented aroma, don't try to rescue it. Discard it and prepare a fresh batch instead. Fortunately, the ingredients are inexpensive, and making a new batch takes very little effort. Now that the elixir is ready, the next question becomes even more important. How do you actually apply it so your perennial garden receives the greatest benefit without overdoing it? Now that the elixir is ready, the next question becomes even more important. How do you actually apply it so your perennial garden receives the greatest benefit without overdoing it? Because surprisingly, the biggest mistake isn't making the mixture correctly. It's using too much of it. Unlike traditional fertilizers, this isn't a product where pouring on more automatically gives you better results. In fact, the opposite is usually true. The goal isn't to overwhelm your soil. The goal is to gently encourage the beneficial biological community that's already living there. Think of it like welcoming a few helpful new neighbors into an established town. You don't need thousands of them overnight. You simply want to strengthen what's already working. That's why application matters just as much as the recipe itself. Before applying the mixture, lightly water the soil around your perennials with plain water. This simple step helps the microbial solution spread more evenly through the root zone instead of soaking into one concentrated spot. Moist soil also creates a friendlier environment for the beneficial organisms you're introducing. Once the soil is lightly damp, pour the elixir a few inches away from the base of the plant. Avoid pouring it directly against the crown, where the stems emerge from the soil. The crown is one of the most sensitive parts of many perennial plants, and keeping excess moisture away from it helps reduce the risk of crown rot and other moisture-related problems. Remember, you're feeding the soil around the roots, not the stems, and definitely not the leaves. This mixture belongs in the soil. There's no benefit to spraying it over the foliage. Moderation is the key to success. For newly planted perennial divisions or young nursery plants, just a few tablespoons around the outer edge of the root zone is enough. As plants mature, you can gradually increase the amount. Small perennials generally need about 1/4 cup. Medium-sized plants can receive roughly half a cup. Large, established clumps usually need no more than 1 cup distributed evenly around the surrounding soil. That's plenty. You're encouraging an ecosystem, not flooding it. This might be the most important question of the entire video. How often should you apply it? For most perennial gardens, once each month during the active growing season is more than enough. Unlike annual flowers that complete their entire life cycle in a single season, perennials are long-term investments. They're building stronger root systems year after year. Supporting the soil steadily almost always produces better results than constantly trying to improve it. If your garden already looks healthy, resist the temptation to apply this mixture every week. Healthy gardens often thrive because gardeners know when to leave them alone. Sometimes the best thing we can do is allow nature to keep doing its job. Timing also makes a difference. Early morning is usually the ideal time to apply the elixir. The soil is cooler, moisture evaporates more slowly, and beneficial microbes have plenty of time to settle into the root zone before the heat of the day arrives. If mornings aren't practical, late evening is another excellent option. The cooler nighttime temperatures create favorable conditions for microbial activity while reducing unnecessary stress on your plants. Try to avoid applying the mixture during the hottest part of the afternoon. Warm soil isn't a problem. Scorching soil is. Extreme heat speeds evaporation and places additional stress on plants that are already working hard to stay hydrated. Good timing helps the mixture do its job more effectively. Now that you know how to make the elixir and how to apply it correctly, let's take a closer look at why this simple mixture can actually help perennial gardens in the first place. Most gardeners naturally focus on what they can see: the flowers, the leaves, the stems, the buds. If a plant looks healthy above ground, we assume everything beneath the surface must be healthy too. But the opposite is often true. The real work happens underground. Every healthy perennial depends on an enormous community of microscopic organisms living around its roots. These organisms are constantly breaking down organic matter, recycling nutrients, and helping create the conditions plants need to thrive. Some bacteria help release nutrients from decaying organic material. Certain fungi form partnerships with plant roots, extending their reach through the soil and helping them absorb water and minerals more efficiently. Other microorganisms compete with less desirable organisms, helping maintain a balanced soil ecosystem. Your plants aren't growing alone. They're supported by millions of invisible helpers working every single day. When this underground community is healthy, plants often produce stronger roots, sturdier stems, healthier foliage, and more reliable flowering. When the biology struggles, plants may still survive. They may even bloom, but they rarely perform at their full potential. That's one reason two gardens growing the exact same perennial varieties can look completely different despite receiving similar sunlight and rainfall. The difference is often beneath the surface. It's important to understand what this homemade mixture actually does. This is not a fertilizer. It doesn't replace compost. It doesn't replace balanced plant nutrition. And it doesn't magically create nutrients that weren't already present. Instead, it supports the biological processes that help make existing nutrients easier for plants to access. Think of your soil as a busy workshop. The nutrients may already be there. The beneficial microbes are simply the workers helping process those materials into forms the plants can use more efficiently. Rather than feeding the perennial directly, you're supporting the microscopic workforce that's working on the perennial's behalf. That's why this approach often makes particular sense for perennial gardens. Unlike annual flowers that begin from scratch each season, perennials spend years developing the same root systems in the same location. Every season, those roots continue interacting with the soil community surrounding them. As that biological community improves over time, the plants often become stronger as well. It's a gradual process, not an overnight transformation. Healthy gardening has always been about building long-term success instead of chasing instant results. That's exactly the philosophy behind this recipe. By the way, if you've been enjoying the gardening knowledge we share on this channel, you'll love the Plant Once Garden. It's my complete 150-page gardening reference, bringing together the perennial foundations, garden plans, planting calendars, and low-maintenance techniques we teach here, all organized into one beautiful book you can keep coming back to for years. You can scan the QR code on your screen or use the link in the pinned comment below to get your copy. Now, let's get back to today's lesson. So which perennials are most likely to appreciate this type of microbial support? Fortunately, many of the most popular garden favorites fit that description. Leading the list are coneflowers, or echinacea. These tough prairie natives are already known for their resilience, but healthy soil biology helps support the strong root systems and sturdy stems that allow them to produce their spectacular blooms year after year. Salvias are another excellent candidate. These reliable summer performers spend months sending up fresh flower spikes that attract bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. Supporting healthy soil beneath them helps provide the foundation they need to maintain that continuous display throughout the growing season. Black-eyed Susans, or Rudbeckias, also respond well to healthy, biologically active soil. They're famous for tolerating difficult conditions, but stronger roots help them continue producing those cheerful golden flowers well into late summer and early autumn. Daylilies deserve a place on the list too. Because they remain in the same location for years, they're perfectly positioned to benefit from gradual improvements in soil health. Healthy roots help support the vigorous clumps and dependable flowering that make daylilies such popular landscape plants. Hostas also appreciate rich, biologically active soil. Although they're grown primarily for their foliage rather than their flowers, stronger root development often leads to fuller plants and larger, healthier leaves. The same applies to coral bells, or heucheras. Healthy soil helps support the steady growth that allows these colorful foliage plants to perform at their best, season after season. There's another group of plants that generally tolerate this mixture quite well. Mediterranean herbs like lavender, rosemary, and thyme. These plants naturally prefer well-drained soils and don't require heavy feeding, so an occasional light application is usually all they need. As always, moderation is the key. Just because a plant tolerates the mixture doesn't mean it needs frequent applications. In gardening, restraint often produces better long-term results than excess. But before you start treating every perennial in your landscape, there's something equally important you need to know. Not every plant belongs on this list. In fact, several popular perennials can actually be harmed if this mixture becomes part of their regular routine. And one simple ingredient in this recipe is the reason why. Not every perennial thrives under the same growing conditions. Some naturally prefer soils that lean slightly toward neutral or even mildly alkaline. Others evolved in woodland environments where generations of fallen leaves created rich, slightly acidic soil. That's why one ingredient in this recipe deserves a little extra attention: the baking soda. Used sparingly, it's perfectly suitable for many of the perennials we've already discussed. But repeated applications aren't the best choice for plants that naturally prefer acidic soil. Knowing where not to use this elixir is just as important as knowing where to use it. Let's begin with one of the most beloved shade perennials: bleeding hearts. These graceful spring bloomers are famous for their delicate, heart-shaped flowers, but beneath the soil they prefer cool, organically rich conditions that remain slightly acidic. One accidental application isn't likely to cause serious harm. However, using this mixture repeatedly throughout the season gradually works against the conditions these plants naturally enjoy. If you grow bleeding hearts, it's better to skip this recipe and continue improving the soil with compost and leaf mold instead. The same advice applies to many woodland ferns. Most garden ferns evolved beneath forest canopies where fallen leaves slowly decomposed year after year, creating moist, humus-rich soil with a naturally acidic character. Trying to change that environment isn't doing the plants any favors. Another perennial that generally prefers to be left off the application list is astilbe. These elegant plants produce beautiful feathery flower plumes, but they perform best in consistently moist, organically rich soil that leans toward the acidic side. Again, the mixture itself isn't toxic. It's simply the wrong fit for the environment astilbes naturally prefer. And sometimes successful gardening is simply about matching the right plant with the right conditions. Hydrangeas deserve a special mention because they're often misunderstood. Many gardeners already know that soil pH can influence flower color in certain big-leaf hydrangea varieties. More acidic soils tend to encourage blue flowers. More alkaline soils often encourage pink blooms. Because this recipe contains baking soda, repeated applications could slowly shift the soil toward the alkaline side. But changing flower color isn't the same thing as improving plant health. Unless you're intentionally managing soil pH and fully understand how your specific hydrangea variety responds, it's usually best to leave this mixture out of the hydrangea bed. Healthy plants should always come before experimenting with flower color. Fortunately, there are plenty of other ways to support hydrangeas without altering the soil chemistry they naturally prefer. One of the most valuable lessons gardening teaches us is that there isn't one perfect solution for every plant. Good gardeners don't force every plant into the same routine. They learn what each plant naturally enjoys and work with those preferences instead of against them. Now let's talk about timing throughout the year. Perennials don't grow at the same pace from January through December. They follow natural cycles. Working with those cycles almost always produces better results than ignoring them. Early spring is usually the ideal time for your first application. As temperatures begin warming and new shoots start emerging from the soil, roots become active long before the plants reach full growth above ground. This is when the underground biology is beginning to wake up as well. Supporting that activity early in the season helps establish a healthy foundation for the months ahead. Late spring and early summer provide another excellent opportunity. By this point, many perennials are preparing to produce flower buds. Coneflowers, salvias, black-eyed Susans, coreopsis, Shasta daisies. They're investing tremendous energy into the blooming season that's about to begin. A light application during this period supports the soil before peak flowering starts. Notice the timing. We're preparing the plant before it reaches its busiest stage, rather than trying to rescue it afterward. When summer arrives, a small adjustment becomes important. Hot weather naturally speeds microbial activity. That means the same amount of mixture that worked beautifully during spring may be more than necessary during periods of intense heat. Instead of increasing your applications, consider reducing them slightly. One light monthly treatment is usually enough. Remember, this isn't about flooding the soil with microbes. It's about maintaining a healthy balance. As autumn approaches, flowering slows, but root growth continues. Many perennials spend this part of the year storing energy underground that will fuel next spring's growth. One final light application, 4 to 6 weeks before your average first frost, can help support the soil community before winter dormancy begins. Then, once winter arrives, stop. Dormant plants aren't actively growing. Cold soil dramatically slows microbial activity. Applying this mixture during winter rarely provides meaningful benefit. Save your ingredients until the growing season returns. Another factor worth remembering is climate. Gardeners in cool northern regions may need to wait a little longer in spring before the soil becomes warm enough for active microbial growth. Patience usually produces better results than applying the mixture to cold ground. Gardeners in warmer climates face the opposite situation. Because soil temperatures stay higher for much longer, early morning or evening applications become especially valuable. These cooler parts of the day help beneficial microbes establish themselves before intense afternoon heat arrives. No matter where you garden, one principle never changes. Apply the mixture to the soil, not the leaves. Keeping foliage dry, maintaining good air circulation, and watering the root zone instead of the plant itself remain some of the best ways to reduce disease problems in any perennial garden. Before we finish, let's cover a few of the most common mistakes gardeners make with this recipe. The first is using chlorinated water whenever possible. Since this mixture depends on living microorganisms, non-chlorinated water is always the better choice if it's available. Rainwater works beautifully. Spring water is another good option. If tap water is your only choice, letting it sit uncovered for several hours may help reduce chlorine in some municipal water systems. The second mistake is using water that's too hot. Warm water activates yeast. Hot water kills it. If the water feels uncomfortable to your hand, it's probably too hot for the yeast as well. The third mistake is sealing the fermentation container tightly. This point is worth repeating because it's a safety issue. Fermentation naturally produces gas. Always use a loose-fitting lid, cloth, or paper towel so pressure can escape safely. The fourth mistake is keeping the mixture for too long. This is a living ferment. It's at its best when used within 24 to 48 hours after fermentation is complete. If the mixture develops a rotten or putrid odor, don't use it. Fresh batches consistently perform better than old ones. Finally, avoid expecting miracles. No homemade recipe can replace proper gardening practices. Your perennials still need the right amount of sunlight, good drainage, adequate watering, proper spacing, healthy soil, and regular care. Think of this microbial elixir as one useful tool in a much larger gardening toolbox. When those fundamentals are already in place, this mixture can become another helpful way to support the living soil your perennial garden depends on. Here's one of the remarkable things about perennial gardening. When you grow annual flowers, every spring you're starting from the beginning. You're buying new plants, preparing new beds, planting again, watering again, hoping everything grows quickly before the heat of summer arrives. Perennials are different. Every year they become a little stronger. Their root systems grow deeper. Their clumps become fuller. Their flowering becomes more impressive. And that's exactly why improving the soil beneath them can be such a worthwhile investment. You're not simply helping this year's flowers. You're helping build the foundation for next year's garden, and the year after that, and the year after that. That's one of the reasons experienced gardeners spend so much time thinking about soil. Beautiful flowers may be what catches our attention, but healthy soil is what makes those flowers possible. The blooms are simply the visible result of an invisible system working beneath the surface every single day. If there's one idea I hope you remember from today's video, it's this. Healthy gardens begin underground. It's easy to focus on fertilizers because they're easy to see. It's easy to chase larger flowers because they're exciting. But truly successful perennial gardens are usually built one season at a time by improving the conditions around the roots. This homemade microbial elixir isn't designed to replace compost. It isn't meant to replace balanced fertilization. And it certainly isn't a miracle cure for struggling plants. Instead, think of it as another tool that supports the living community beneath your garden. A healthy soil ecosystem helps organic matter break down naturally. It helps recycle nutrients. It helps maintain good soil structure. And over time, those small improvements can make a noticeable difference in the way many perennial plants perform. Will you see dramatic changes overnight? Probably not. Gardening rarely works that way. Real improvement usually happens gradually. You may first notice greener foliage, then sturdier stems. Perhaps your salvias continue blooming a little longer. Your coneflowers stand a little taller. Your black-eyed Susans produce a few more flowers than they did last season. Maybe your hostas seem fuller, or your daylilies produce stronger clumps the following year. Those are the kinds of changes healthy gardeners learn to appreciate. Because lasting success in the garden is usually the result of many small improvements working together, not one magical product. It's also worth remembering that every garden is different. Your soil may be sandy. Your neighbors may be heavy clay. Some gardens already contain rich organic matter. Others are just beginning that journey. That's why observation is one of the greatest skills any gardener can develop. Watch your plants. Pay attention to how they respond. If they're healthy, continue supporting the conditions that made them healthy. If something isn't working, adjust your approach rather than assuming more is always better. Gardening has never been about perfection. It's about learning. Every season teaches us something new. Even experienced gardeners continue experimenting, observing, and improving year after year. That's part of what makes gardening so rewarding. No two seasons are ever exactly alike. And no garden is ever truly finished. There's always another flower preparing to bloom, another pollinator visiting, another lesson waiting beneath the soil. The goal isn't to control nature. It's to work alongside it. When we understand how plants naturally grow, we stop fighting the garden and start helping it thrive. Sometimes the smallest changes create the biggest long-term results. Healthier soil, healthier roots, healthier perennial beds. That's the real purpose of today's recipe. Not instant results, not impossible promises. Just giving your garden a stronger foundation so your plants can continue doing what they've evolved to do. If today's video helped you see your garden a little differently, and you'd like to keep learning the timeless gardening principles we share on this channel, don't forget to grab your copy of The Plant Once Garden. It's my complete 150-page gardening reference, bringing together the perennial foundations, garden plans, planting calendars, and low-maintenance techniques we've shared over the years. All in one place you can return to season after season. Simply scan the QR code on your screen, or use the link in the description or pinned comment below to get your copy. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up and shared it with another gardener who loves growing beautiful perennials. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing for more practical gardening tips, low-maintenance ideas, and step-by-step guides to help you build a healthier, more beautiful garden. Until next time, happy gardening, and I'll see you in the next video.